So I'm going to just take a look at this report we have as a sample report, how this one particular person wanted to be communicated to. So let me just read a couple of those off. Well, this one person did, he wanted whoever was communicating to him to define the problem in writing. Okay, he wanted to see it in writing. Next, speak at a rapid pace. In other words, they didn't want people to just drag on the conversation or to speak so slowly that they didn't have the patience to want to listen to that. Another one here is look for any oversights that person might have, and then bring them out in a positive way. Say, hey, you might not have noticed, but there's something here that you might not have observed, and it needs to be addressed. So to do that in a tactful way, that was something the person was looking for. So if we knew that, if that decision maker knew that ahead of time, or his coworker knew that ahead of time, that would create a much more positive and much more fluid communication process where this person wants were being met when it came to communicating with other people, where other people are talking to that individual.
Absolutely. No, I would say that would be very important. And when you're talking about, if you do have those type of assessments, one of the big things is either you have kind of yours and they have theirs, but one of the big things that is important to me is really being able to sit there and compare notes. When you look at a manager direct report dyad there, I mean, it is super important to be able to understand each other. We talked about value to the organization last time. And when you can understand the value that your direct reports bring to the organization, but also maybe even more important sometimes, use the example of the clinic owner, where the regional manager who is in charge of all these different clinic locations, the clinic managers could not understand why they were doing what they were doing. And it just seemed kind of almost incompatible, where they had to worry about the environment of their clinic. They had to worry about the patient care. They had to worry about all the things that made the clinic successful. But then that next step up, managing 10 or 12 clinics, they really had to see, what do we have to do to keep the business sustainable? What growth do we need to do? What is the profitability measures? Those type of things. And sometimes it seems incongruent. Like, why are we worried about that when we need to make sure the environment that our patients are in, the patient care is great? You know, the kind of aesthetic and harmonious end of it versus kind of the pragmatic end of it. But once they understood where they were coming from because of tools like this, they were like, okay, all right, now I get it. Take away some of those misconceptions and understand where they're coming from, and it makes being able to communicate a lot easier. But I love having a list where there's like a comparison report where you have two people side by side, ways to communicate with Amy, ways to communicate with Joel, and you have 7 or 8 or 10 of them, and each of them can kind of pick their top 3 or 4 and then compare notes. And so when you've got ways to communicate and then ways not to communicate, like you had mentioned as far as some examples. I have a example of a actual, comparison report, and I've just made up the names as far as the change of as far as Amy and Joel. But, when it says ways not to communicate with Amy, it says, don't talk in a loud voice or use confrontation. Don't use gimmicks or clever, quick manipulations. Don't make statements about the quality of your work unless you can prove it. Don't be disorganized and messy. Don't make conflicting statements. Don't dilly-dally or waste time. Don't talk to her when you're extremely angry, and don't threaten, cajole, wheedle, coax, or whimper. So she picks her top 2 or 3, but you look at the other end of it, her direct report, Joel. Don't be curt or tight-lipped. Don't ramble on. Don't be dictatorial. Don't leave decisions hanging in the air. Don't legislate or muffle. Don't over control the conversation. Don't talk down to them. Don't drive on to facts and alternatives or distractions, and don't let them overpower you with verbiage. So when you look at those things, they're completely different on what kind of triggers one versus the other, but they're both very important. And how many times would you really know about that with the other person if you didn't have that data there in front of you?
Sure. Well, so often, Dave, it's the problem is we communicate to people the way we want to be communicated to, or we don't want people to communicate to us the way we think that they don't want to be communicated the same way we don't want to be communicated to. So what I'm saying is these are blind spots for us, and that's where a great report can point these things out. And you mentioned the dyad where the two people sit down and they compare notes. That's a wonderful way to do it. As you know, we also do the triads where we sit down and we facilitate discussion between each person, the report and the direct report, or in other words, the boss and the direct report, so that now we can shine a little light on some of these characteristics or some of these factors that are part of this report. We might say something like, well, Joe, could you tell us a little bit more about what that means when you say you don't want to be having someone talk down to you? Could you give us an example? Now you can shine light on this type of an issue or this concern and then get it cleared up. Because again, too often people just assume that I'm doing everything right when I'm communicating with Joyce here. And as a result, I have no idea that I am offending her or that I'm just turning her off when it comes to creating that communication process that I'm really striving to create.
Absolutely. Now, a lot of it depends on the level of relationship you have. If you got 6 direct reports that and you and the team all
Yes,
get
that's
along
right.
really well,
Different
you can
people.
sit down just one-on-one and just
Mhm.
do, when you're doing your one-on-ones, take these type of comparison reports and compare notes and just go over them and review them. And everybody leaves with their set of, okay, now I know more about Amy, I know more about Joel, I know whatever. But on the
Mhm.
flip end of the coin, if you've got, say, 10 direct reports, you've got 2 or 3 that are just, or 1 or 2 that could be really contentious. Having somebody else come in and play that kind of neutral third party
Mhm.
to go over all of them with them. You know, you
Oh
might
yeah.
not need it for 7 out of 10 of them. 2 of them might be important, and 1 of them is crucial because you don't.
Mhm.
Well, what are you accusing me? I'm not accusing you of anything. Here's the data.
Mm. Dave, I know of an example where I was working with a college or university, and there was one gentleman in the office. This was in the admissions office, and he had a great voice. It was a booming voice. He could have been in. I always told him, I said, "You could be in radio. You got such a great voice." Well, there was another person that he worked with, and when they would talk, I observed that she would kind of like just cower a little bit. She just didn't
Hmm,
seem to be responding well to what he was talking about. So
right.
anyhow, the one guy left, and later I was just chatting with this one woman, and she said, I just can't stand it when he speaks. He just speaks too loud. It just
Hmm,
makes me feel like I'm being I'm just being attacked. What all she was referring to is that his volume was so loud. It was naturally loud for this gentleman. She just couldn't put up with that, and she didn't even tell him this. So the fact was, he took it as she was not agreeing with what he had to say, or she didn't like him. So
hmm.
you see how easy that we can see this misinterpretation happening if people don't understand how people want to be communicated to or not be communicated to.